Information shared on the following program is for general information purposes only. It does not constitute legal, tax, investment, or other advice, nor is it intended to recommend any particular investments, products, or financial instruments. Always seek advice from your financial advisor, attorney, or accountant with regard to investment, legal, or tax questions.
As my grandmother Hazel used to say, who are their people?
Welcome to the only show in the country dedicated to helping savers worry less about money, the Worry-Free Retirement, with your host, five-time author and fiduciary, the money missionary himself, Tony Walker.
Welcome, folks, to the Worry-Free Retirement. I am Tony Walker, and for about the next 28 minutes or so, I'm going to take you on a journey specifically designed for the saver personality in mind. And if you're wondering why I invoked my dear old grandmother Hazel's name into the conversation, it's important to note her famous last words, not literally her last words, but what she used to say sometimes, which was, who are their people? Now you might say, what in the world does Hazel saying this has to do with money, Tony? Well, growing up around my granddad and his loving wife Hazel, who both passed away years ago, unfortunately, this was something she used to say whenever someone was trying to figure out who somebody was. So some of you may be relating to this. Back in those days anyway, you could pretty much find out a lot about somebody if you knew something about their family. This was the good old days, folks. Tracking down family members was pretty easy. So again, if you knew something about their family, it probably was a good indication of who this person was, and more specifically, to the topic of the show today, their reputation, whether in good standing or in bad. So Tony, again, I'm confused though. Why, you say, do you bring Hazel's question into bear here? And how does that have anything to do with money and possibly financial advisors and who their people are? Well, hang in there with me. And you're going to see in a minute why this has everything to do with you and your money. Now, we're not going to dive into who your family members were. We don't want to know any of that today. But what we want to dive into is this concept of all these financial know-it-alls out there who keep acting like they're the only ones with the information and the financial answers. So have you noticed this basically? You just turn on the TV, radio, do some Google searches, and you're going to find all kinds of dogmatic opinions on any financial topic imaginable. And you start Googling this stuff, you start looking for this stuff, and up pops the financial know-it-alls. And generally, this the way you spot a know-it-all is they're always bashing somebody else or some financial product as if they've got all the answers figured out. Folks, again, I've been doing this over 33 years, and here's what I've humbly learned. There is no perfect product, and there is no terrible product, only the product that's right for you and your situation. But we have to take this one step further, and this is the purpose of today's show. We have to ask, who are these people? In other words, what are their credentials that gives them the right to be so proud and boastful about their advice? Now here's some examples of whimsical opinions that I've heard over the years from a lot of these know-it-alls. Here's a big one. Max out your 401k no matter what. In other words, put all the money you can into a 401k. Could be good. I've seen where it could be terrible advice. Here's another popular one. Never buy whole life insurance, only buy term insurance. Again, potentially a very damaging prospect for people trying to do retirement planning. Oh, here's the biggie. This one gets me. This has gotten very popular. Never buy annuities because I hate them. Well, I mean, there's a lot of things I don't like. You know, I'm not that crazy about Brussels sprouts, but that doesn't mean I tell people not to eat them. And then finally, I love this one. Only invest in growth mutual funds because over the long term, they always do well. Well, here we go, folks. You know, it could go on and on with these dogmatic opinions from different people. So, as we look at this, as we think about this never ever crowd, that's the crowd that says never ever do this, which again, that's how you spot a know-it-all, my response is this. Who are these people? Are they credible to give you advice? And what are, most importantly, what are their credentials? Think about this. You know, I'm sitting here with America's favorite financial sidekick, Aaron Orander. I'm sure you would agree with this, Aaron. What other profession that is giving advice that's very important to you, other than the financial world, do you have to have credentials? Let's think about it. Let's take legal advice. Many times people are asking me about legal things, and quite frankly, I cannot give legal advice because I don't have a law degree. I'm not credentialed. What about medicine? You know, what about out here trying to practice medicine without the proper credentials? He'd be thrown in jail, all right? But not in the financial world. Unfortunately, just about anybody can get on the radio, can get on TV, can write blogs, can do, and here's the key. As long as they're not accepting commissions or fees, depending on the circumstances, they can tell you anything regardless of whether it's true or false. And there's no way to verify the facts. So you might say, well, how do they make money, Tony? How do these people, for instance, on the radio make money if they're not licensed to sell products? Well, they make money selling books, which is perfectly legal, but they sell books, they sell materials, they sell tapes, they sell CDs, study programs, and as long as they keep all of these materials under $100, newsletters, all that stuff, they're exempt from anybody checking up on them. There's no government regulation whatsoever on these folks. So it seems like, here's a good example. I keep seeing this one fellow on TV who, incidentally, this fellow looks pretty angry, but he's always talking about how he hates annuities. So I read an article the other day, and it said this particular fellow isn't even licensed to sell annuities, which I didn't know this. Because he's not licensed to sell annuities, in other words, not credentialed, he can actually replace the annuities without any oversight whatsoever. Pretty scary stuff. Now, I'm a fiduciary. And I'm proud to be a fiduciary, but what that means is the government comes in and monitors me. They audit me. We have all kinds of strict regulations we have to follow, that if I'm recommending anything, whether it's a securities product, which I can recommend, whether it's an annuity, regardless, I've got to disclose how I'm compensated, I've got to disclose the commissions, the fees, and most importantly, I have to verify why I think a particular product is in your best interest. That's what a fiduciary does. So the problem is we're not all playing on the same playing field. We're not all playing under the same rules, and we have a lot of non-credentialed people that are taking the narrative away from people who are credentialed. So what I thought I would do in the next segment, I'm going to take a little of time here, and I'm going to kind of share with you some of my credentials. I think it's important to do this. By the way, I was meeting with an older gentleman the other day, and he said, we got this topic came up a couple of months ago. This older gentleman started asking about my credentials. And I said, well, sir, I don't mean to be braggadocious, but so you ask, here they are. And he laughed. He said, son, it ain't braggadocious if you can prove it. So I thought that's pretty good. So when I come back, if you would bear with me, this is really important stuff. I'm going to share with you the credentials that I bring to the table and why it is so important that before you accept financial advice from anybody, you make sure you know their credentials and you know who their people are. Stay tuned. You're watching the WorryFree Retirement. I'll be right back.
And now it's time for the adventures of Stella, the Black Russian Terrier. You've been watching The Adventures of Stella, the Black Russian Terrier.
Feel like the financial world is making more money on your money than you are? Tired of working hard to save money only to get 1% in return? Well, I'm Tony Walker, inviting you to meet with me in person to create a safe and simple game plan that includes mailbox money for life. To schedule your no-obligation appointment with me, simply log on to TonyWalkerFinancial.com. While there, just click on the Let's Get Started button and we'll make that happen at your convenience. That's TonyWalkerFinancial.com, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Worried about running out of money in retirement? For a limited time, five-time author and retirement specialist Tony Walker is making available his latest book, Mailbox Money for Life. For your free copy, simply log on to TonyWalkerFinancial.com.
And now it's time for Tony in the Trenches.
Welcome back. Our Tony in the Trenches. Boy, this is really wasn't a question, I guess. It was kind of a question, and this sheet of paper was handed to me by one of my clients who had recently been to a workshop, And let's put this in the screen, Aaron. It says, new book reveals President Reagan's secret, the 702J retirement income plan. So I started researching this thing and talking about credentials. I thought, number one, who in the world's coming up with this? And really, did President Reagan really sign off on this? Folks, this is a kind of a goofy concept of really just taking what we like to do, in many cases, overfunded life insurance. But these people apparently are taking this one step further, because in the tax code you can borrow against a life insurance policy. And if you fund it up to what's called the modified endowment limits, well, that's been around for years. That's a common strategy. But what is scary about things like this, and I'm seeing this more and more, is people are pitching life insurance as private pensions or 702J. And what they're telling you is you can get a lot more tax-free income in retirement by taking these policies out. Now, that could happen, but also that could be a disaster, because what they're suggesting is borrowing from the cash value to get that tax-free income. And what they don't tell you, or maybe credentially wise, they don't understand what they're setting up for, is a potential disaster of tax ramifications. Because if that policy does not remain enforced properly, if the interest is not paid back, if the premiums come back, all of that money you've borrowed can be what's called phantom income tax, and now you get this huge tax bill that gets paid and charged to you. I've seen this happen, folks. It's pretty ugly. So be careful of this 702J retirement income plan. If you've seen anything like this and you want a second opinion, please get in touch with us at TonyWalkerFinancial.com. All right, we're talking about credentials. Boy, there's a good example of that. What are the credentials of these people? But assuming you get any advice from any advisor, regardless whether it's somebody else or a fiduciary like myself, you've got to ask yourself an important question before running out and giving your money over to them, or accepting their advice and basing your life's work on their advice. What are the credentials of this person providing the advice? In other words, where did they get their information? And as my grandmother Hazel used to say, who are their people? In other words, over time, who have they been influenced by in terms of all of their philosophies, their economic reasoning behind things, the different products they tend to suggest? Because it's very, very important to know we're all influenced by people, folks. And I'm going to share with you in a minute people that have influenced me in my 33 years in this business. Again, if you're just now joining us, I'm not trying to make this braggadocious, but I'm just trying to share with you where I've been these last 33 years, so at least you can get a glimpse of my credentials. So what I was going to do real quickly, and we give this out to prospective clients, I'm going to have America's favorite financial sidekick kind of go full screen here, and we're going to bounce back and forth. And I'm just going to read to you some of the things that I've done over the years so you can get a feel for my background and the credentials that maybe I would have in what I call the secular world, which is nothing wrong with that, all right? So let's kind of dive into this. First of all, I did graduate from Western Kentucky University in 1983. I had a double major in broadcast journalism, which now I'm getting to use my broadcasting degree. My dad, bless his heart, rest his soul, he'd love this. And then I also had a degree or majored in psychology, which again, I used that to write the book, The Three Personalities of Money, and which helped me propel into this concept of the three personalities of saver, investor, and speculators. So all of that stuff really has helped me in my practice. I got in the business in 1984. I became licensed in life and property and casualty insurance, started with my father-in-law. In 1986, I got licensed to sell securities. So I've been through every major stock market downturn and experienced it since '86. I completed the Chartered Life Underwriter, or CLU designation, in 1988. I was 28 then, and at that time, one of the youngest in the country who had completed that designation. I served as the president of the Southern Kentucky Estate Planning Council in 1989, so I did a lot of estate planning back then. In 1994, I completed and successfully matriculated through the College for Financial Planning's CFP educational program. In 1996, this was a big moment for me. This was pretty cool. I started one of the first financial TV shows in the country, certainly one of the first in the state of Kentucky, which was called in 1996, Your Money Matters. And that was on in Bowling Green and Louisville for years. Some of you might have remembered that show. 1996, that was the first year I became registered as a fiduciary and began managing money for a fee in 1996. I became LEAP licensed, L-E-A-P, in 1997. Now this was a huge moment in my career because I was trained in the area of macroeconomics and opportunity cost by a gentleman by the name of Bob Castellone. Huge influence in my life then. Fast forward to 2004 through 2007, I entered a program called Strategic Coach. I would travel to Chicago every quarter for 3 years and really honed my practice. That's where I decided to begin writing books. And I really, truly understood the concept of the worry-free retirement. That's where all that was birthed out of, and the concept of process over product. Keep going. In 2004, at the same time, I've got one of his books here. This is Ed Slott's book. I became the first person or first group of people to participate in Ed Slott. He's a well-known CPA, and his elite IRA advisor group. That was in 2004. 2005, I've traveled to, now remember folks, this is all on my nickel. I don't work for any companies. I'm paying for all this stuff out of pocket because I'm trying to learn more from different people. That's because I've realized I don't know it all, folks. I've got to learn from different people, and I'm so glad I did all this. It's really given me a wealth of different information. But anyway, every quarter I would fly out to San Diego for a year, and I studied with about 49 other people. There was 50 of us throughout the world. And there's a guy that flew from Australia to these things with a Mr. Brian Tracy, and it was called a Focal Point program. And the reason I went through that program is I wanted to learn more about how to help people set goals and then how to better monitor those goals for my prospective clients and myself. Very, very helpful program for Mr. Tracy. 2007 to 2014, many of you may have remembered I was the featured retirement specialist on Wave Listens Live, Wave 3 Listens Live in Louisville. Took live questions every Monday. That's where I met America's favorite financial sidekick, Aaron Orander. He was there at Wave at the time. But for 7 years, I did that every Monday, answered questions live on the air. Great experience. By the way, a lot of those videos are on our YouTube channel at Tony Walker Financial. You can check those out. There's all kinds of stuff on there. It's pretty cool stuff to go back and watch those. Let's see, 2013, I was nominated for Advisor of the Year by Senior Market Magazine. I made it to the top 5 there. 2014 to the present, of course, we've been hosting and we produce our own show now, the WorryFree Retirement, which of course you're now watching, and it's also on the radio on several stations. And of course we've been long-standing members of the Better Business Bureau, successfully for years had an A+ rating with them, of which I'm very proud of. So those are a lot of the credentials. So when you're meeting with prospective advisors, folks, you need to ask about their past. You need to ask if they're a fiduciary. You need to ask if they're licensed in the products that they are either purporting to support or if they're bashing. If they're bashing products and they're not licensed in them, I would tune them out because obviously they don't know a lot about the products or there's a reason they're not selling them, and that's probably why they're bashing them. There are products we don't sell, but we might recommend. Those would be to investors, and we generally send those people to other people that specialize in investors. We focus on savers. Now, in our remaining time during this segment, what I wanted to do, a lot of times I'll be at a workshop talking about things I've read over the years or various books. I would like to just spend a little bit of time in sharing with you several books, and I've read a lot of books over the years, but these are books that I would suggest anybody consider checking out at the library or purchasing. Okay, so no particular order here. I'm just going to grab them right off the top, but these are books that have had a big influence in my philosophy and the way I've formulated my ideas for the WorryFree Retirement. The first one we just talked about, Ed Slott. This was the major book I think that I like the best. He's got several now, but it's called The Retirement Savings Time Bomb. And this is dealing with the concept of I call it the tax tumor that's buried inside your 401k or IRA and how to try to deal with that thing. Folks, if you've got a 401k or IRA or 457 or lump sum pension, if you don't have a game plan for dealing with the taxes, the government's going to eat your lunch. Let us try to help you look at that thing and see if there's anything we can do to try to reduce or mitigate that tax tumor. Let's look at that. John Bogle. John Bogle was credited with creating the Vanguard funds. I've got a client, incidentally, that met John Bogle when he had a loan office and his one secretary before he started Vanguard. Pretty cool story. This was years ago. Great book, The First 50 Years. John Bogle was the first I ever really kind of understood why fees really are so important, keeping your fees down on investments and the huge drag those huge fees cause to people. Incidentally, for those of you who are wanting to look at lower fees, we can do a fee analysis on your current brokerage statements at no cost or obligation. And if you have a managed account, many of you are paying 1.5%, 2% a year, I guarantee you we can save you hundreds if not thousands of dollars a year in fees, which means you get the fees back, plus you get interest back that you're going to lose. So it's a lot of money. That's called opportunity cost. Incidentally, here's another good book. This is actually a college textbook by Heyman and Bloom. It's called Opportunity Cost in Accounting and Finance. Great, great book, but if you don't understand opportunity cost, the financial world is going to take you out to dinner and eat your lunch there too. Because what happens is many of you, it's called OPM or other people's money, the financial world has understood that if they can get access to your money and use that money between now and the time that you come try to go get it, they're going to make all the money on it, and all they do is give you back the principal. The concept is opportunity cost. And what I've learned is what we try to do in the Worry-Free Retirement is first attack cost, then chase returns. Most of the financial world is tempting you with chasing returns. Right now, the market's at an all-time high. I saw this happen in 2007, folks. Is it going to crash? I don't know, but it eventually will go down. It always does. And what happens is everybody's kind of riding high on the market, and they don't want to look at taking any winnings off the table. Folks, if the market has gone up for you, congratulations, but get with us. Let's talk about safeguarding some of that money and trying to reduce cost. Here's a good one. Benjamin Graham's Intelligent Investor. Benjamin Graham says of this: if you don't understand what you're investing in, and if that investment entails risk, listen closely, folks, he says you're not an investor, you are now a speculator. So good stuff, great book. Warren Buffett, I think, kind of got his training or a lot of his philosophies from Benjamin Graham. Great book. Another good one, if you want to understand anything about the Federal Reserve, I don't know that much about the Federal Reserve. I know one thing: since they've kept interest rates down, it's propelled the stock market to new heights, and pearl savers out there aren't making any money. I know that. That's not good, but this is a great book. The Creature from Jekyll Island. I went blank there, but Mr. Griffin, it tells how the Federal Reserve was first started in 1913. Incidentally, 1913, that's when the income tax system was created. That's kind of ironic. Now you might say, what in the world is that book? Edwards Deming, who's that, Tony? Out of the Crisis. This talks about the concept of process. Now the reason I like this book, I've learned a lot about process. Mr. Deming was the guy that went over to Japan in the 50s because nobody over here would listen to him on how to make automaking more efficient. And of course, we know the rest of that story. So a great book on process. And then finally, one of my favorite books by Solomon Huebner, who created the American College, written years and years ago. This is called The Economics of Life Insurance. So folks, the next time people don't know anything about life insurance and start bashing permanent insurance, you need to read this book, and it's going to expose them for how little they understand about macroeconomics and the fact that all of us are going to die. And the point is, why wouldn't we want tax-free cold hard cash for our loved ones at death? Seems pretty simple to me. Well, I hope you're enjoying this segment. When I come back, we're going to turn to the Bible and see what it has to say about credentials. And you're going to find out it has nothing to say anything about credentials, but something very near and dear to my heart, and that's called resolutions. You stay tuned. I'm going to get me a cup of coffee. I'll be right back.
I keep getting all this free financial seminar invitations. How do these people get my name? Are they on the up and up? How do I find out?
Folks, there's no free lunch, and there's always a catch. I'm Tony Walker, and over the past 30 years, I've personally hosted hundreds of free financial workshops. They're fun, educational, and I can assure you there's never a catch.
Log on to TonyWalkerFinancial.com to register for Tony's next free workshop.
Oh yeah, a good cup of coffee. Welcome back to the Worry-Free Retirement. Saving a few minutes for what the Bible has to say about credentials. Not really, but I think you're going to find this very interesting. In fact, several years ago, a dear brother of mine suggested I read a biography by Ian Murray on the life of Jonathan Edwards, a renowned philosopher and theologian who lived from 1703 to 1758. Now, Edwards, who was a pastor and follower of Jesus Christ, knew that his walk with the Lord would be one of constant struggles and challenges. So to help keep him focused on the things of God rather than too focused on the things of this world, he wrote 70 resolutions. And listen to this. Here's how he prefaced them. Being sensible that I am unable to do anything without God's help, I do humbly entreat Him by His grace to enable me to keep these resolutions so far as they are agreeable to His will for Christ's sake. Now, while my level of spiritual maturity and intellect pales in comparison to that of the famed Mr. Edwards, who, by the way, in defense of my grasp of Scripture, we must admit that back in the 1700s, they had a little more time to read Scripture. Let's face it. Even Mr. Edwards was said to have rode his horse side saddle and riding along reading the Bible while I was doing it. You try doing that, battling I-65 traffic. We're just kidding, folks. But again, they had a lot more time to focus on such things. But I figure if Mr. Edwards could come up with 70 resolutions, surely Tony Walker could come up with 10. This was tough, mind you, to come up with 10. But I did this years ago. So if you don't mind, what I thought I would do is just simply read them to you. And as I'm reading them, Aaron's going to put them up here real quick. And I would challenge you to think about coming up with your own resolutions for the purpose of, again, trying to keep you focused on your walk with the Lord. Here's resolution number 1. I tell you what, Aaron, let's just go to full screen here on this, if you would. Full screen, number 1, by the power of God's Holy Spirit, that I may cease from consideration of self. Number 2, to speak less and listen more. Number 3, to pray without ceasing, particularly for the spiritual needs of others, no matter their plight, background, or circumstances. Number 4, to put the needs of my own household above all else. Number 5, neither to let success nor failure enter into my consideration. Number 6, knowing full well the undeserving gift of grace and mercy from God, that I be less judgmental of others. Number 7, to make it my ambition to lead a quiet life, attend to my own business, and work as long as God would grant me the privilege. Number 8, to not worry about tomorrow, but rather live each day as if it could be my last. Resolution number 9, to awaken each day, knowing that I am one step closer to my home in heaven. And finally, resolution number 10, that at the end of each day, thankful that He is faithful and that I am forgiven. So folks, I share all this with you today, not to gloat, not to be boastful, but to simply ask you to consider not only the credentials of the people you're taking financial advice from, but also to consider, and taking very seriously, how grounded is this person in providing you the advice he or she is giving you? Does this individual seem grounded enough to be more concerned about you, or they seem to be more concerned about how to make a buck off of you? So let me close with some words of wisdom that you might want to consider. Let's turn, if we would, let's go full screen here, Aaron, to 1 Corinthians 2, 15 and 16. 1 Corinthians 2, 15 and 16 simply says, "But he who is spiritual appraises all things, yet he himself is appraised by no man. For who has known the mind of the Lord that he should instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ." And folks, that's good news you can take to the bank. You take care, and I'll see you next week. And in the meantime, if all else fails between now and then, you remember to be worry-free. Make it a good one.
Thank you for watching the Worry-Free Retirement with Tony Walker. If you need a safe and simple game plan for your retirement, log on to TonyWalkerFinancial.com and schedule a free, no-obligation meeting with Tony.